Record Show.
And co-host Marine Corps Map, coming to you on Monday and Tuesdays in Studio A, noon to 2 Eastern.
And Studio B on Wednesday nights, 10 p.m. to 12 a.m. Eastern, with educational, instructional, information, and situational updates, often with wonderful guests on the current landscape in the U.S. and overseas.
This is a go.
We are with you, side to side, and back to back.
Please join us on Monday through Wednesdays,
as well as other hosts and guests here on Revolution Radio.
We're not gonna take it anymore. That's right, we're not gonna take it anymore. We said we're not gonna take it anymore. That's right, we're not gonna take it anymore.
I'm Reverend Medium Tracy Lockwood, and I'd like to invite you to join me as I discuss life from a medium's perspective. I'll be talking about insights that I've gained through readings, with topics like your guides, angels, animal communication, past lives, our transition, and the afterlife. We'll take a deeper look at the metaphysical meanings of symbols and totems, and I'll give you some practical exercises to help you develop your own natural psychic ability. Join me on From a Medium's Perspective.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, FreedomSlips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Well, it's time to stumble down the road with host Bridgette Lynn Dolgoff and co-host Jannie Vaught as they carry stones, dig holes, and wield their shovels along the way. On Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. This is not a seated event. As they talk, run, stumble, carry, dig, drag, laugh, fight, sing and pray, dance and kick and scream, and oftentimes fall. Hey, is that a stone or a buffalo chick? Now, here are your hosts for the next 2 hours on carrying stones and digging holes. But I won't be there.
The hell I won't.
Hey there, it's Carrying Stones and Digging Holes with Bridgette Lynn Dolgoff. Let me make sure my mute is off. And my co-host, Jannie Vaught, which is going to be here today. I'm just waiting for them to call in so that I can get them on. Hold on one second. Hey there, Greg. Greg? Hello? Greg? Greg, can you hear me? Greg? Hello? Hello, Greg. Hi, Greg.
Oh, okay. We're back. We're on.
Awesome. Okay, now I'm just waiting for Jannie to call in, and I'm just doing the openings, but you're on air and you're live. So this is Carrying Stones and Digging Holes, and we are on Saturdays at 1 p.m. Pacific. We have a 2-hour show. Okay, I think I've got Jannie on now. Hey, girl.
Yes, that's me. Hi. Did Greg get you?
Yep, we got everybody on. Woohoo! No. All right. Okay, so anyway, Carrying Stones and Digging Holes radio show, and my co-host is Jannie Vaught. And woohoo! This week she gets to make it with us. Let's talk about Revolutionary Radio. We are listener supported, so please go to our website and do the click on the funding. We also have heirloom seeds, and it's a great way to start a new life and also support our network. Also, Janie needs food for her rescue animals sometimes, and sometimes I need some extra help, gas money, or whatever else. If you feel like donating, you can donate at PayPal, consciousness of economics at gmail.com. And also, I'm putting this out there for the future. I have a website called theredroadsociety.com. I have a trading post page. So I'm looking for people who have, within the guidelines, kind of more of the native way kind of products, barter, free trade. And we're going to ask, Greg at the end of the show if he wants to actually be on our trading post for his wonderful seeds, maybe. So anyway, and we hope to have some things. I'm sure Janie's going to come up with some amazing things to put up there. And I've got a few things that I'm going to start the page off. So it's the trading post, and it's on the redroadsociety.com. It doesn't have anything on the page yet, but we hope to start getting some wonderful things going on that page where people can find, what they need to walk a good red road. And also so other people on the red road can, be seen in their products and, in their way of life. Okay, so we have a spectacular guest today. And since Janie knows more about him, we are going to let her introduce our guest and get down to business, talking about seeds and sacred seeds and listening to what Greg has to share with us. Okay, Janie, give us an intro on Greg.
All right. I've known Greg for I don't know how many years. I met Greg in a cornfield on one of the pueblos in New Mexico, and I was introduced to his work with Jim Corn. And he was working with Carl Barnes at that time, before Carl passed. We lost Carl last year. And I had never seen corn like this in my life, and I was hooked. As soon as Greg pulled back that first ear and I looked at that beautiful corn, I knew my life had changed at that moment. And I have been an avid seed saver. And Greg is always my wisdom keeper. If I have a question about any seed, any growing, how to grow them appropriately, how many to grow, I go to him. I call him, and he is always answers the phone and answers my questions. And Greg has been active in soil restoration, getting things back to the right people, getting the seeds restored back to the native people, and how to grow them in a right way. And this is Greg. Hi, Greg.
Hi
Hey,
there.
Greg! Woohoo!
Hey.
Welcome. So we're gonna
Thanks.
we're gonna give you the
Thank you for the
floor,
invitation. Yeah. Okay.
and so you're gonna start us off, and you're gonna take us down the path of the seed.
Okay. Well, anytime you all want to chime in, give us a little prodding here and there, because it can kind of send me off on different tracks, and that would be good.
Okay.
And thank you for inviting me onto this. I'm kind of really, the truth is I'm just a regular gardener like all of us, and it's always a journey. I know that all of you in each of your work with seeds and nature have had your insights and your inspirations, and I think that's what we want to talk about today. And you may kind of find a lot of this to be familiar to you. There are a lot of people out there that are listening probably right now that may be a little more have a little more background in some of the formalities surrounding the seeds, but you can just see if there's anything else that I might be sharing that might add to what you know. And but it's been a lot of fun. It's been a journey for me. I've always been, as a child, always been around nature, always attracted to that. I basically just grew up kind of on the edge of the suburbs in the middle of the country, and I just sought out those opportunities to be around nature and experience the qualities that has, and it's like what the little children today really should be encouraged to do that. Had a background in horticulture and botany in college and grad school, and essentially pursued a lot of that more as my own personal interest, and I had other jobs in other areas. And to make a long story short, about 1994, which is not too long ago, for those of us who are thinking those kind of lengths of time, I met a man named Carl Barnes in Oklahoma, where I was living, and he passed away in 2015. So I'll say he was. He was a Cherokee, part Cherokee, part Scotch-Irish fella who grew up in the. He actually was moved to the far west part of Oklahoma as a child, with his family there, and was there at the time of the Dust Bowl, right there at basically ground zero of the Dust Bowl years. And they stayed it through, and those were some incredibly difficult times for those people. And as he grew up, he reconnected with his grandfather and learned about the wisdom of the seeds, about the corn, and the Cherokee roots that he had. And in the course of doing some farming, that they had a homestead there, and then Carl also did other work, on the outside, but he started to cultivate some of the old corns, the old maize, and began to learn about the native origins of certain varieties, certain types, certain remnants of this crop, and in the course of that, started to actually locate or have them reappear in his fields. Some of the corn that he recognized, this belongs to this tribe, or this belongs to such and such people. And of course, in Oklahoma, that's where a lot of the native people were gathered up by the government back a couple of hundred years ago, or back 150 or so years ago. So there are a lot of representatives of a lot of the different native tribes in the Oklahoma area. And so he had a lot of access to a lot of different people. And he started to repatriate some of these seeds. And when you go back into the native culture, and we can talk a little bit about maize or corn and its origins and its journey, but if you go back to where those people were growing these certain strains of their corn, there was a relationship with that is beyond anything that our Western culture can comprehend. It's as if it is one and the same as their bloodline, their language, everything about them. It's all one thing. And that's what Carl would, for some of us that learned to, started gathering around him and learning about the wisdom of the seed from him, he would emanate a lot of this kind of energy about that, and we would be aware of that. And he would tell us about these people that would start planting the seed, and their lives started mysteriously changing, and they had these experiences and different things. And of course, at the time, I was kind of interested in that, but I was also interested in some of the seed that he had. And I thought, oh, well, you got any more of that particular kind or that one? And but it was a lot of fun. And one of the things that right at the very first when I met Carl, and I'd been playing around with seeds and growing plants and doing this for, pretty much all my adult life. Carl was at a native plant gathering that was down in the southwest part of Oklahoma. There was a friend of mine that said, come on down to this. There's a friend of mine I want you to meet. And they had some different herbalist people, and different people had plants and different things that they were having there, and little classes and such. And it was kind of an afternoon, a really beautiful day. And Carl was there with a whole lot of display cases of all kinds of old heritage native corn. And I want to kind of like a lot of people that aren't really familiar with seeds they're more engaged in other things, but that aren't quite as familiar with like gardening and that sort of a thing. And they think about corn, they might just think, okay, there's corn that you eat off the cob, or there's corn that you make cornbread with, or there's, and mainly those are like the yellow and the white corn and the sweet corn and the commercial type things that are most visible. okay? And if you just sort of peel behind that, there's an entire universe of just that one thing, of just that one species. It's like all the kinds of human beings that there are. And so getting back to he had this display case with all these different samples, and right at the very bottom of the case, there were a couple of little ears, and they were about 3 inches long, and they had every color of the rainbow in them. I'm talking about purples, greens, pink, everything in there. I mean, and I just went, whoa, I got to get to know this guy. It was like something just said, I got to get to know this guy. And it wasn't until about, he lived way up in the northwest part of the state, so he wasn't down in, around Oklahoma City very much. So, but about 3 or 4 months later, he came down to visit his brother-in-law. And so I went, and he was there, and he handed me some of the seeds from those ears. And I went, thank you. Of course, obviously. And but a little bit kind of close to that time, was that bombing of that federal building there in Oklahoma City, which was a very profound event for the collective consciousness of that city, obviously, and the country too at that time. And there was a lot of sort of altered states of mind for a long time. It was a very transformative thing for that area. And not but maybe 2 or 3 weeks, 3 or 4 weeks after that, I had that seed with me, and I had it in a little container, and I poured it out under my hand, and it was as if a voice just said, this seed is going to change things. And so I had that 50 or so of these little seeds, and I had all my garden stuff in my backyard there, so I said, I'm going to grow it this year. And that was the start for me of growing this particular corn that took me on a journey that started me to really open me up to what this is all about. And, of course, through the different next few years, I obtained more samples of this particular corn from Carl, which gave it a little better genetic base. You don't want to just start with a few and bank everything on that. With corn, you want to have a lot of different seeds of that kind to keep the genetic diversity. So I was getting more samples of this same little rainbow corn from him. And took an interest in growing it and saved the seeds and saw it kind of interesting patterns and colors, but it was still kind of in its sort of a nascent form. There was the different rainbow colors would show up, and the different really interesting sky blues and greens would appear. And then in 1999, I had a job opportunity out in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I moved out there. And for the next couple of years, I was able to kind of intermittently, maybe the next 3 or 4 years, I was intermittently able to grow some of that corn, find some people that had favorable locations. And then after about a year, I was out in Arizona for about a year and a half. And then when I returned back to Santa Fe, I was talking to a friend of mine, and I said, I still have this rainbow corn. And I said, I really feel like it needs to be grown, but I haven't really had the opportunity to do it like I really feel like I should. I said, I need to find a place that has the water, the land, Native American environment, and somebody there who is the steward of that land who is interested in the corn. I said, I have the perfect person. That man was a fellow by the name of Jose Lucero, who was part of the Santa Clara Pueblo, which the Pueblos are like what in other parts of the country they refer to as reservations. It's kind of like that, but these are places where these native people were able to stay on their original ancestral lands. And so up in the northern part of New Mexico, there are a number of these settlements that have their areas of land, and those are the Pueblos, and that's a Spanish word basically that means village. And these are different groups of people that are kind of culturally and linguistically connected. And then Santa Clara is one of those. And so Jose had this land here, and he gave me he said, hey, let's grow this corn. And at the time, we were going to grow a whole bunch of other colonies. And so we did that at the same time. Now, did somebody need to chime in there? I thought I heard a little voice there.
No,
anybody need to cut in for anything?
I can chime in a little. I think that's where I met you.
That's about the point where you and I met, right? And we had another friend, a couple of people that we knew, and that's how I met Jannie. And we, and at the time, I'd been starting to grow that rainbow corn more extensively at the Pueblo. There, we had flood irrigation. It was, water.
Yeah, it was really a nice spot.
And, I mean, just amazing. And hanging out, being a part of, being with Jose's family, and just, at the time I was trying to learn more about the northern New Mexico traditional corn that the native people and the Spanish people have been growing for generations, and you can find a lot of those in the, in the markets and such. And so I was exploring a lot of that at the same time I was growing this rainbow corn. And of course, what this allowed it to happen was some of the blue corn and the little Pueblo traditional popcorns were ones that I grew kind of right near where the rainbow corn was. And there was a little passive cross-pollination going on. And I really kind of intuitively knew that this was really important to allow that to happen, just to bring a little more diversity and a little more kind of the vitality into this rainbow corn. And so we grew this sort of various different experimental plots for about 3 years. And then on the 4th year, I could really see that the rainbow corn was doing really good, and we just grew that. And I just said, that was 2008, and I just kind of like said to the corn, show your stuff. And that crop did very well, and we harvested it, and I believe that was probably the crop that Jannie saw. It may have been the year before, too. That it took kind of an evolutionary jump, I think. And what you have in a lot of crops, anything, I tend to go with the corn, the maize as that's sort of a keystone for me. But any of these crops, they have what are called land races. And from what I understand, and some of you might have a better definition for it that are out there listening, a land race is like a very genetically diverse sample of a plant or a crop that is passed from generation to generation, and it's adapted to the area that they're growing it, and it carries with it a whole library of genealogy and a lot of resilience that can sort of shift around with the changes of, year-to-year changes of environment. And this rainbow corn was kind of like a land race in the making by sort of adopting some of the other genetics from these beautiful northern New Mexico corns. And I felt like if I was becoming a part of that wonderful experiment of life that northern New Mexico is, with all the different cultures that come together there, I said, well, then this corn that I bring needs to marry up with some of the other. And so you've heard the song, when East End boys meet West End girls, magic happens. And so there was some transfer between those kinds, and it did really strengthen it. So that was what we had. And that became, if you've heard of it, that became what they're calling glass gem corn, which is a name that, there's a name that name was because I did a lot of photography of those different ones with the different colors. So if you just go on to Google Images and just type in glass gem corn, it'll take you all the way through the rabbit hole that you want to go, because a lot of other people have done a lot of photography with it. It does have all these colors, and that's an example, I mean, not to get too far into that, but that's an example of what working with one kind of seed can take you. And and I want to say that I personally only share seeds. I don't exchange money or anything like that. Sometimes I'll do a seed swap and say, hey, do you got any of that seed? Here's some of mine. But generally, pretty much I have never done any kind of a marketing or selling type experience with the seed. And that is because, and we can get back to the blast gem a little bit, but I want to, now this has kind of gone off into this, and it's what I call that, the seed is the currency. And Carl would talk about pure air, pure soil, pure food, and pure relationships. And the currency is not the dollars and cents and that kind of media, but the currency is the seed and the relationships. The seed itself becomes like the currency, and the wealth is the relationships, because in previous time, and I was just reading some of Martin Prechtel's information about this, and he was talking about how you would have different native people, and when there was a marriage between a person in one clan and a person in another clan, they would have each the husband and the wife to be would have their seeds, and there was not only a marriage of those two people and those two clans, but there was a marriage of the seeds, and that lineage goes back, and it's unbroken. Goes back 300 generations, at least 7,000, 8,000, 9,000 years ago in the center of Mexico, where that nascent species emerged. And that sacred contract was signed between the plant kingdom and the human kingdom to do this experiment, which we call the maize, the corn. And out of that simple grass, if you can see all the different colors of corn, not only in this glass gem, but I mean, you go into all the old native corns, which are the real heart and soul of the whole thing. Every color, every form that you can imagine is there, and you go, how in the world did that much diversity? How much did all that come out of that simple grass, the teosinte, and some of that related wild species there in Mexico? How did that happen? And it's like, cosmic intelligence. Did we have help? The evolutionary explosion that happened, and it's that relationship between the human beings and that plant that somehow elicited this to happen. And so coming back to the present, or to the near present time, these people would marry, and they would bring their seeds together, and they have the ceremonies on some of these pueblos, that parts of those they invite the public in, and they do a ceremony, and basically it's the green corn dance, or something called something like that, but that's kind of a common term. And it's usually around the first part of August. And I go, well, it's interesting that they would do it then, because you would think they would do all their ceremonies when they're planting, which they probably do, and they would do something when they're harvesting. But if you realize that in this particular climate here, that first part of August is when the corn is tasseling and the pollen is floating and the silks are receptive, and the actual transfer of the pollen is happening. And that's when it's almost as if all the books are open. And when they sing those songs and they do those dances, if you've ever been there, you will know in your heart of hearts and soul of souls that those people understand all the way to the truth of it, that they are carrying that lineage along by their energy, and that the way that that plant and the relationship to the human beings continues is that ceremony is something that was from ancient times, and they still do it. And those songs and everything, it's real. And I am, grateful that they are continuing to do that, because it's helping to hold the universe together, in my opinion. But it's pretty remarkable. Did you want to comment on anything?
Yeah,
I'm
loving your story. Yeah, I'm just going to put my little avenue in there. Before I met Greg, I was doing my ceremonial training, and through my parents' generation, a lot of that got lost. But my grandparents always grew corn in a large garden, corn and beans and squash. And that was just something we always did and always do. And it was really a big deal to have the corn and harvest the corn. And, they would feed the corn shucks to the chickens and to the horses or whatever we had going. And so I had been doing some extreme training with some native teachers. And I had gone to a little gathering, and I had met Grandfather Martin. And it was a rather public operation. They had these tables and people were talking. And these people had gone up to the reservation and got Grandfather Martin, a Hopi elder, and brought him down. And I went there to see two things. I went to meet the crystal skull, which I did, and to meet Grandfather Martin. But I'm just somebody in the background. I just parked my car and paid my little whatever it cost to get in. And I'm sitting way in the back. And he was speaking, of course, through an interpreter. And he was saying some things that were just blowing my mind. He was explaining the prophecy rock, and he started bringing up the corn and the beans. And I think Greg knows Grandfather Martin. And anyway, he looked at me and he kind of waved at me. And I saw this little movement. And I thought, is he talking to me? Oh, how interesting. Okay. So after it was all done, a lot of people were funneling up there to meet him. And I stayed way in the back. And I went up, and he came around the table, and he had a little pouch. And he took me aside, and he did a greeting. And it's a secret greeting. I don't know how he knew who I was or what I was doing. He knew intuitively. He recognized me. And then he did a pollen blessing on me. And I had never had a pollen blessing. And I was so struck. I was so touched. And then we said our goodbyes, and his interpreters, and they went one way and I went my way. Well, I was on my way to Santa Fe. And then I get a phone call. Hey, you need to meet somebody that's got this sacred corn patch going. And I went, oh. So, it's like the corn. He used the corn. It's us and the elements and the earth. All of it channeled together, that I was sitting in my little vehicle on the side of a road waiting for this guy I never met. Never seen. and they followed him into this little Pueblo place and walked out there. And I was, again, so touched by the corn. And I knew that point, that something big in my life was changing. That I call them trail markers. And they're kind of like, you ever had those negative trail markers, but you also have the trail markers that are saying, oh, you're at the right place at the right time. Now just pay attention. You don't have to overthink it. You don't have to overfeel it. Just pay attention. And Greg and I, we were running up, and he was so enthusiastic, and he was showing me this corn. He was talking about how when the pollen pops in the air and it floats down over the silk, he was telling me things that I kind of knew but had never experienced. And like I said, when he pulled that first shuck off that rainbow corn, and I saw that beauty, I was dazzled, and I had a recollection deep inside of me that I recognized this corn. I did. And it's been an ongoing process ever since. It's awesome. And sometimes we just need to pay attention and let it happen. Little did I know that this little Hopi elder would be kind of the instigator and the little push and the pollen blessing that I needed to really clear up my path. It was really good. I'm really grateful to him for that. I don't even know if he's still with us.
No, he's passed away.
Yeah.
Grandfather
Okay.
Martin.
Yeah.
It's been a few years. Yeah.
Yeah. How about you, Bridge?
You got dusted with that pollen.
Oh, yeah.
I want some.
Yeah.
So all I have to say,
yeah.
this is all I have to say, and then we'll let, Greg continue on because he's doing an awesome job. But I can just, there's, I just feel really emotional because I can feel, like the healing, I think that, like all of us have been on in this road, this path. Yeah. So I'm kind of emotional. So, but anyway, I'm definitely this summer, I'm going to make a plan to visit Jannie. I don't know at what kind of capacity. And Greg, I'm going to beeline it over to you, and I'm going to come and visit you too, because I'd really like to see your work in person. For sure. But the other thing too is, after my brain cancer and a lot of this stuff, I had been working with all kinds of Native teachers and other teachers my whole life. And then I, got brain cancer and really had to focus on changing my life. And one of the things I wanted to do was I just wanted to grow herbal medicine plants so that I could make for my patients in my practice, medicines. I could do everything else for them, but I didn't have, medicines. So I went back to biodynamic college. I ended up on these farms, wasn't sure where I was going, tried permaculture, lots of different stuff, and then found biodynamic the compost, because it's an alchemical process that's unbelievable and how it restores the soil. Anyway, so a lot of the people, when I was getting my certification at Steiner College in Sacramento, a lot of the people that came there and a lot of the instructors had major health crises or some kind of really serious crisis in their life, and had found their way to biodynamics. There's a native guy, he's Paiute, he died all of a sudden, but his name is, I forget. He wrote a book called Buffalo Biodynamics, and he put the native work back into the practices, the biodynamic practices of Steiner. Unbelievable work. But I just know when I went into the biodynamic school and started working with a lot of these people and the processes of the water, Victor Schellenberger's work, and the processes of the soil, and really looking at plants, and it is what saved me.
Yeah. Yes, and it is.
I think anybody who gets into this work finds that out, that this is what is going to save us. The farmers, we're going to save this planet.
Yeah, and what a joy when that corn breaks ground. There is something that's so happy when I know you plant it and you wait and you see those little green sprouts come up. It is like a holiday. It is so joyous that you see it break ground as it reaches to the sun. And it puts us all back into that great circle in the web. Just puts us all back into it in a natural flow. It is so wonderful. And, many of us have different journeys and stories with nature and corn or beans or squash, even tomatoes, whatever. And I think that is something we need to not forget. We need to make that part of our own history that we share, because we need to share our stories. That is one of the things that has been lost, is storytelling. And because along with the story comes the genetics of who married who and who brought that corn and who brought that corn. When I first met Greg, he said, how to read corn? I was like, I don't even know what you're talking about. Wrong language. He said, you turn it sideways and you look at each kernel and you go from left to right. You see, each kernel has its own DNA, because that silk connected to that got that pollen, and it might have been pollen from another one, and all of a sudden I got it. I understood the language. I'd always just seen, my grandma cook a big pot of sweet corn, or we'd grind corn and make cornbread and have pinto beans with it, something like that. And I never looked at it in such an private, personal. I've always say life is personal, and corn is very personal. And when it doesn't do well, it's very personal again. Like Bridgette has feelings. When my corn is struggling because of weird weather or whatever, I take it very personal. A lot of plants can struggle and make it or not. But I tell you, when my corn is not happy, this Cherokee girl isn't happy. Then I am like going to find out what.
Oh, you did it. Yeah.
I want to know what's going on. Do I need to feed it? I may be calling Greg. I might be, finding out, what's going on. And it's air pollinated. And Greg and I talked a little bit, and I wanted him to kind of cover a little bit the types of corn.
Okay.
We have, different varieties of corn, and different areas that certain corns grow in. Because there are some areas that are more arid that grow certain types of corn that I grow here.
Okay.
Can we kind of briefly cover that?
Yeah,
are we on good time?
Yeah, we are. We still have
how much time before the break?
I think we have probably, 15 minutes or so. So the other thing, too, the question I have, because I know about my experience, is what was the kind of personal work or internal work that you found that you maybe needed to do, or that was part of the process of being able to get yourself in alignment with working with this corn?
Well, what happened when I started growing that rainbow corn in the earlier days, there was a group of people, a spiritual teacher that I had been with for a lot of years, and he had passed away, and there were some, the people that sort of took over, and the group kind of went on and continued, and it was a very close family kind of relationship with, a large number of people. And then there came a time where it kind of went through some difficulty. It went through some issues. And those issues became very personal to me. It was almost like where a young child is experiencing the trouble in his family and divorce and different things, and it sort of tears you apart. And I was going through a lot of that, and it was triggering a lot of other things in me, like those things will. And I started to grow this corn, and of course we had the bombing at that building. All this stuff was happening around the same time, and so that sort of, I'm starting to grow this corn, and I'm experiencing these different things of, just the growing of it. And over those few years, and even into when I moved to New Mexico, it was as if somehow, metaphorically, that corn and everything that appeared in it as I was growing it was interpreting what I had gone through with this whole, these different challenges that I just mentioned. It was interpreting it for me so I would find peace with it. And it did it impeccably. And I said, I'm going to follow that trail of breadcrumbs as far as I can follow it. And I never looked back. And that's how I got started.
Great answer.
I am so glad you did.
That's so good. I mean, this is like, just so, I don't know about you guys, and I don't know about our listeners right now, but I have been struggling over the last 6 months. I've been going through, Jannie knows, I've been doing a huge epic amount of personal work to get back to the land. And so this is just a really powerful conversation that I needed to have today, because it puts me back in focus of what matters for me. May not be for everybody else, but the seeds, the soil, the land, the sunlight, the water, it's bringing me back online. So thank you so much for this conversation. So we still have a few minutes, Greg. If you want to talk about what Jannie's question was, if you could talk about all the different maybe types of corn, different places maybe where they came from, the types of soil they grow in, just throw some stuff out there for about 10 minutes.
Oh, okay, we can do it. I was at some friend's house, and I hardly ever watch TV. I mean, I'm not around it very much, but I'll pop in once in a while and kind of check in and see how the culture is doing. and or sometimes if I'm in a motel room or something, and you see those morning shows, the morning shows that are on, that come off that are on every day. And it's kind of like a little bit of an eye-opener because it's very a very specific part of our culture is being portrayed in those morning shows. The people are really similar to each other, and they may have different ethnic people on there, may have, different races of people, but their sort of way they present themselves is very kind of homogeneous, and at least in my perception. And I'm kind of going, there's got to be more to our culture than this. It's sort of representing something that's very robust in its own way, but it doesn't really represent our whole of our culture and the whole of humanity. It sort of represents sort of that, and that's kind of like what corn is to a lot of people. They only see the yellow sweet corn or the different, the yellow and the white and the different very specific common commodity types of that species. And it has come from, like I say, the 300 generations of spreading through, 2 continents and Central America with every bit of diversity you could imagine. And fortunately, a lot of it is still in existence, and people are getting back to growing it, and a lot of the original indigenous people are still growing it. And so you have your what they did, of course, in the evolution of all this, they figured out there were some that there were very small kernels that were real hard, and those became popcorn, because that's the way the kernel is formed. It's really dense, and you can heat it up, and it pops and does that. And there's other grains you can do that with. You can do it with sorghum and amaranth. You can make pop, like popping, like popcorn. So popcorn's one type, and the major one is like the one that is ground for flour, which is a softer starch. And so those are your bigger ears. And then you've got what they call flint corn, which is kind of like, sort of like popcorn is. It's very dense and hard, but it's a larger type of an ear, and it's a very durable and very usually very adaptable to climate change and a lot of that stuff. And then you got your, something similar is what they call dent corn. And if you look at the ear of corn, you see a little crease in the kernel there, and that's just because the way it forms as it's ripening. It's sort of the way the starch gets converted. It just collapses that little spot there, and that's commonly what you see used in feed and commodities and products and that sort of a thing. And then you've got sweet corn, which corn on the cob, and that's just like one kind of major genetic difference that changes the way that the sugars are converted when it's ripening, and it doesn't all go to hard starch. It just all kind of collapses in on itself. So if you take sweet corn and you grow it beyond when you're going to pick it and let it become ripe as a seed, like it does to the end of its cycle, it looks like little raisins, So, and you can reconstitute that. You can go get sweet corn and grow it all the way to the end. Instead of picking it to eat on the cobs, you can grow it all the way to the end and cook it, and it'll reconstitute. So it's another way to preserve it. But there are a lot of varieties. And out here in New Mexico, we have the blue corn, which is almost black. And that's and of course the Hopi have that. The Hopi have a huge array of their type of corn. And if you look at their corn, the plants are much shorter, and they're much more like stalky and wider leaves. They're adapted to this dryland farming that they do there in that northern Arizona there in their traditional lands. And so that's a very distinct type of corn, and it's beautiful. And they're preserving all that, and that's all over. And so we have this richness of heritage that's out there with this one plant.
What is your favorite? Go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask you, what are the lines on the corn kernels? You'll see lines on corn kernels.
Oh, the little, there's probably a really good explanation for that. Some of us always call that chin mark, because if you look at some of the native, the tattoo on the chin, it looks like lines like that, and it sort of looks like that pattern that they would put on those traditional tattoos.
Yeah, the women would tattoo from the bottom of their lips down their chin, and
it's like lines.
And they were called chins. And when you go through some of the natives, the reds, mainly the reds, I see it in, you'll see those kind of a yellow with a red line, running through the corn.
That's it. Yeah.
Kernel.
That's real. That's very specific to a lot of the ones in the Southwest.
Right.
But I think you probably find them all over. And if anybody wants to, like, start looking around the different seed saver groups and even the catalogs and such, these different corns that still have some link to their, like, the Mandan and the Hidatsa and different Osage, some of these different people that had some of these corns and still do today. A lot of that has gotten out there, and they're adapted in different ways. And some of them have these different patterns on them. Like, there's another that looks like what we call robin egg. The Navajo have one that look a lot like that, and it's a speckled, real pretty. Right. It's kind of a creamy white with these blue speckles in it. It's just really neat. Yeah. It looks like a robin egg.
This little section, when Golden Eagle, Carl Barnes was also known as Golden Eagle.
White Eagle.
Sorry, he would return.
That's a new twist.
Yeah, White Eagle. He would return the corn to the tribes, and the tribes, to do ceremony, have to have their sacred corn returned. And so he wasn't just growing corn out in a field. He was reinstating lineage and history.
He was reconnecting their lineage. Yeah, he was doing that. Yeah.
Yes, it was very, very important what he was doing. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, that was very good. That is more real than we can imagine. I mean, it's not just a nice metaphor. It is real.
Yes, their children return. Their mother. Yes. Yeah. Their origins returned and are still
and after
there.
The break, I think after the break, this can kind of lead into something. So but go ahead and finish what you're saying. Yeah.
So the one thing, I just wanted to add, before we go to break, is that people on this planet have been connected to the soil and land and plants at some kind of capacity from the beginning. And so even if people are listening and they're not, their background isn't native, or they can go back and look in your lineage and find out where your oldest relatives are, or your oldest ancestors are. And you'll be able to find, with looking and researching, what their relationship was to the soil, what their relationship was to the land, what kind of seeds that they would have used and cultivated. I was reading a book about how back in the ancient world that the women would, harvest the seeds, and then before they would move their encampments, they would sow the seeds in their clothing or different places, because the seeds were the most valuable possession they had. And if they didn't have the seeds, they wouldn't be able to survive in the new place. Everybody has an ancestry to the seed. Everybody has an ancestry to certain plants. Even when we were, wandering around, and we would, utilize or eat plants more at hunter-gathering before we started cultivating them, for farming. So everybody has something in the closet that has something to do with the soil, that has something to do with the seed and the land. And once you start connecting with that, and you start connecting with that stuff in a serious way, your life changes, because it activates. Like they're talking about, Greg and Jannie are talking a lot about the activations, the ceremonies, the returning, which is an activation of the energy field around the body and in the cosmos and on the planet. And this is what a real awakening is. This is what the real one is, right?
Yes, it is. It is. Yes. And we feel complete. We feel connected instead of disjointed and not a part of. It's important to feel a part of.
Yeah. Yes. And like you went through, like Jannie just went through a thing where she, basically cut off her finger and they had to sew it back on. But because of, because of her desire to get and touch the land, because she's like, I have all these things I need to plant. They're all yelling at me. I need to get them done. Her body healed really rapidly so that she could do the work. So,
that's right. Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of components that go along here with our relationships. And I really like what you said. I'm taking notes here. I really like the pure air, the pure soil, the pure food, and the pure relationships. I really, really like that. Those four.
Yeah, I think there was air, water. Yeah, and you had water in there somewhere. Yeah, yeah. Relationships at the end was the one that was the key.
Yeah, and the other thing too is like I liked how you explained the wealth. The wealth strengthens the relationship. Yeah. And we're not talking about the wealth of a currency that you go to a job that you don't like. We're talking about the wealth of your ancestry that you're building, right? With your relationships to the natural world, and the benefit to others and the benefit to yourself, and what that happens when you start to share that wealth, and what happens when it starts to combine.
Yes, that's real wealth. Yeah. That is feeding my family and my future onto the seventh generation.
Yeah.
And those generations behind me did it the same way. And it's why I'm still alive now, and my children and my grandchild, and why we will go forward. It's because we have been conscious about it.
All right, guys, let's hunker down. And we got a break. We'll see you about 3 after.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Enter into a world unseen on Raven Star's Witching Hour. You will encounter eclectic topics from the realm of spirit brought into our matrix of truth. With your host, the Solaris Blue Raven. Solaris will bring you an array of unique guests covering topics from ghostly spirits to amazing anomalies, covert technology, UFOs, and shadowy global events.
And that's right here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, Saturdays midnight till 2 a.m. Eastern Time. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Let the magic rise.
Join me weekdays for my new show, Tell Chris Joe. This is going to be a problem show brought to you live from Kensington. Thursdays, I'm dealing with hot topics, heated debate, what's new around the world, and ring-ins to discuss listeners' problems and offering considered and heartfelt solutions. So join me, Chris Hart, for Tell Chris Joe. Stop what you're doing, grab a cup of tea. I'm coming live from Kensington. Relax, let me entertain you with a coffee bar online. Listeners' very personal problems. So that's Thursdays, 2 p.m. in the afternoon, Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. See you there. It's going to be lots of fun.
This is Barbara DeLong, host of Nightlight Radio, inviting you to join me on a cosmic journey, exploring a metaphysical montage of spiritual material, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between, including spiritual readings for those who seek enlightenment. Let Nightlight provide you with equal measure of light, love and laughter, insight, wisdom, and inspiration. Monday nights, 10 to 12 p.m. Eastern, right here on Studio B, Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com.
The The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, FreedomSlips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Hey there, welcome back to Carrying Stones and Digging Holes. And whoo, it was a rocking first hour. One of my friends that I appear on her show, not appear, but I vocally appear on her show periodically is Mona. And she has the adventures of the Feral Hippie Show on Revolutionary Radio. But anyway, I asked her while we were on break, I said, hey, are you listening to the show? Isn't it like great? And she just put, chin corn on there. And that was like a moment where it just kind of like whack. I'm sure that it hit a lot of people in the head, right? With the whole tattooing and everything. It was just like such an amazing visual, right? And just a relationship with the corn. It was amazing. So Greg was thinking that he had some leads on where he wanted to go for the second hour. So do you want to go ahead and are you there, Greg?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I wanted to say, we've been exploring a lot of things about Native cultures, indigenous people, and I just want to say that, those of us who are not of that lineage, as far as our ancestors, we're just learning. So for those of you who are Native who have that deeper understanding, please forgive any faux pas or anything we say that might not be completely accurate, but we're exploring and we're learning and awakening in the best way we can, inspired by the same thing that inspired you all in your ancient journey. And so we're doing the best we can. I personally have my ancestors are German, some Irish, and I hope to someday take a trip back across the generations and find out the ancestors that I sprang from and the seeds that they planted. And so that lies ahead. And so I'm very grateful to be able to live on this continent and experience the spirit of the land that all the Native people have known forever. And it's been quite a gift. So I just wanted to say that.
I totally agree. And we never on this show ever mean anything offensive to any Native culture. And I highly respect and honor them.
Yeah. Yeah, they're doing great work. They're keeping it going. And,
against all odds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We talked about, just kind of right before we were talking about, you were saying people that live in the cities or whatever. And when I was talking earlier about the seed as a currency and about how I personally am not engaged in selling, but the relationships and the thing about the lineage going back through time and how you have the grandmothers and grandfathers who were growing a certain kind and how we have that connection to it. And I mean, we all know that. Even if we haven't had a long history, we have a lot of us have connections to different types of seed and varieties that were from our relatives. And that's an important thing. So we have a sense for that. And when you work with the seeds or anything, we talk about these changes that are happening, and some of us talk about things that are pretty heavy duty, that are a little more far out than what most of us think about the world and where it's going, and how we may need to adapt to some big changes, whether it's climate or whether it's what country is doing what, and things are happening around us with societies. That big changes can happen, and a lot of people are talking about, I want to go back to the land. I want to live without, be able to live and sustain myself, be totally self-sustaining, et cetera, et cetera. And there are so many layers to that. And for most of us, and myself included, definitely, we're just kind of scratching the surface of what it really means to live, authentically on the earth in a way that would reconnect to the original sources. But you can take, most of us in our everyday lives, we get up in the morning, we got to do this and that, we got to pay the bills, we got to do, these different everyday things we have to do. And to try to wrap our mind around changing our whole life over to this entire different paradigm is just overwhelming. And what I have found by working just with the seeds, just that one aspect, one piece of it, that it happens, it seems to embody for me all the elements of what it would be like to live in that totally transformed culture. It has the seed elements of it that I'm able to engage, even though that the rest of my life is doing conventional stuff. And it tells me that if people were to take something, it could be seeds, it could be music, it could be architecture, it could be all these kinds of things that you totally connect with, that could help you sort of have, almost like the training wheels, like the training entrainment, you might say, to get you tuned in to the bigger picture, even though that you may not have all these things going on. You're not living out in the middle of some paradise place and doing all these things off the grid, but you're just living your day-to-day life. You can tap into it to and if enough of us do that, when the time may come where we need to do it in a big way, then we'll have the pieces of it already sort of programmed into our living memory, and we'll go, okay, this is what I got to do, and I remember this is how I did it with the seeds. I can do it with this. And so that's kind of a thing that I'd like to share. I say it starts with the crack in the sidewalk. I mean, you can be in the middle of the most urban place. In fact, you can transform from the inside out that's an entirely different path that is as valid as being out in the middle of Shangri-La. In the middle of an urban culture, you can transform from that crack in the sidewalk and go all the way back, just the same. So wherever you live, it's there. And so the potential for this kind of relationship with creation and nature and the flow of life is it's wherever you are, and whatever life style experience you're now having. It's all available equally to all of us. And another thing, and it kind of goes back to the thing about the lineages of the seeds and the selling. And for me, and we talk about, you asked me about, how did I get started and what kind of personal experiences I had with changes in my life and such. And then had I decided to take those seeds and start selling them, I think I would have lost that connection. Now, I don't know, I can't speak for everybody else, and I can't speak for everybody else who engages in that, but for me personally, the seeds open the doors. And so I say the seed shared freely opens the doors. And probably one of the, when I grow a lot of things out, I grow a lot of different things and harvest the seeds, and I have them, and certain ones will kind of call to me to give them out more than others. Some of them like, hey, this is the one that got it'll tell me, hey, get me out there to as many people as you can. One of the funnest things, one of the joyous, most purposeful things that I find is showing up somewhere and just giving out seeds. It's just a blast. It's great. And that has done more for me. And then, of course, this rainbow corn, of course, that we're talking about, that got to know became called Glass Gem that went out there. it's out there migrating around. Some of it's non-commercial. Where it originally got a leg up to go out into the world was when I gave it to some people that I knew that had the true heart for it, and I said, see if your people and friends are interested in something like that. This man and his partner became the directors of Native Seed Search, which is an organization down in Tucson, for a period of time, and that is a nonprofit, and they got a hold of it and loved it. And that was the vector that got it out into the world. And I thought, okay, that's perfect. It was a nonprofit. I mean, they sold stuff, but it was for a nonprofit mission about native indigenous seeds and increasing awareness. And I said, well, hey, it helps that whole purpose. I'm like, great for it, And I could have caught that wave early in the day and probably made, if I was a very entrepreneurially type person, I probably could have cashed in on this particular seed and its phenomena, but I never ever had. It's like somebody told me when some of it started showing up. Somebody said, "Hey, this was selling for $5 a seed on eBay," and I said, "My friend," I said, "Larry, I'm not going there." I said, "I'm just not going there," and I realized that all that journey that seed and just all the seed took me on, and the value of that. You could take all the money that was ever made and ever will be made on all this stuff, and they're making some money on it, and that's okay. All of that, stack it up, wouldn't even come close. And I'll even say, add into that all the gold in China. I could just look at you and say, it doesn't even stack up. I said, what this gave me by sharing it is just beyond imagination. I'm just a regular guy that, fell into this. And I just sort of followed it the best way I could. And that's what anybody can do. And if you start to if you really get genuine with the earth and the spirit and the seeds, it's going to take you there. And if you be unconditional with it, and you don't because I think that and this is just my take on it, I feel like that when you pass the seed from generation to generation, and it's going in the way, like it's on the red road, as it were. And then it gets out and it becomes captured in an enterprise. And I'm not saying it's a right or wrong thing. I'm just saying this is perhaps where the energy flows. Somewhere in the experience of something going into a commercial enterprise, the lineage is broken. Okay, it puts a sort of a record in the stream of that life form that is there. It's just like when we have certain experiences in our life as a child, and it puts an imprint on there, and it kind of still affects us years later. And those things do happen. Now, I would say that for things like these operations that grow and produce seed for agricultural purposes and our food supply, that's all noble, and you have the scientists and the breeders that have done the great work of helping adapt things to diseases and all these. The people that have done that in the good way over the years with the cooperative extension and all that, that is like a noble thing. It's incredible, and I'm saying that, yeah. But if you're just like an everyday person that wants to hang out with the seeds, and you've got a lot of people will say, "Hey, I want to start selling these." You might want to think twice, and you might want to see what happens if you just go into this other paradigm and see where it takes you, because it might, because that little bit of money that you make, yeah, that becomes its own reward, and it's okay, and that's great. People have to do things, but if you take this other path, it's not about right and wrong. It's just what path you're going to take. You might discover something that you didn't expect that is much bigger than get out of the box, and it'll take you there. But I've had a lot of fun with it like that, and I just wanted to share that. I just want to say, there is another way to look at this.
I've thought about a lot of that kind of stuff myself, and how it relates. And sometimes I feel like when I take something that I've been working with, right, in a good way, it has I studied when I was like 23 with a native medicine woman, really powerful woman. And one of the things that she always talked about was that everything has like 64 dimensional layers in it. And so there's libraries of information, like in one seed, it has a 64 dimensional layer. And we're dealing with it in the third dimension. We're dealing with it in its physical form. And when we dishonor it, you know, by turning it into a mechanism to make money or to create monoculture, or just say seeds and things like that, then we restrict it to its third dimensional abilities, which isn't entirely bad. But there's a whole other, you know, 64 dimensional layers that goes along with that being, whether it's a seed or it's a microorganism in the soil or it's a rock or whatever else. And so when we do step out and we do decide to make a business out of things that we're working with or working on, it loses its power and it loses its medicine. Versus you handing somebody some seeds and going, oh, you have depression? Oh, you're thinking about growing a garden this year? Here, have a few seeds. Go ahead and plant those and see where they take you. See where
you go.
See what the teachers have to teach you and where they're going to take you, right?
Yeah.
Janie, are you there?
Hand them this. Yeah.
Janie. Hello? Uh-oh.
Yeah, I hear her back there.
Good, I muted myself. I unmuted myself. Yeah, remember I got in trouble for not muting. I'm unmuted. When there is an equal exchange of energy with seeds, and corn is a very profound one. And what Greg was talking about, we give and we get back. And even when I plant it, I get back. I give it away, I get back. I know that it's going in the ground to feed someone else, and they will pass it along again. So there's a seed, a comeback. There's payment. There's an equal exchange of energy that has to do with the monetary dollar, which to me is just cursed us as humanity, because we have lost the true value of skill, of our knowledge, of our skills, and our seeds. And like you said, that women who sowed the seeds in their dress, they knew they were hiding their gold. That is true gold.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Well, I would say that, well, you know, and you know, of course, people that came as immigrants too were able to do that. You got all these things that we got from Africa, from all parts of Europe, all parts of Asia that came in through history, and it's incredibly rich. And it's because somebody was able to do exactly that. Some of them is just a handful, and from that started the whole thing, and it's amazing. You know, and one of the
I think I'm going to start praying over Doritos.
What?
When I'm in the store, I'm gonna ask the energy of the corn to come back alive in Doritos, so it wakes up people when they eat their Doritos, because they aren't even aware that it's corn.
Yeah, you can heal that. Like I said, if it does, you
That's
know, like
awesome thought.
probably if you, I kind of had a funny thing happen. It was like I made it. I've been ordering some seed. I still buy stuff, you know, even though I don't sell stuff. I still buy stuff to get things, and
of course.
And I order from a particular company that's fairly well known, and they had a couple of varieties of corn in there that I was very interested in. That I wanted to have the seed just so I'd have it, and you know when I you know soon be able to grow it. And there were two different ones from the Osage people that I was aware of, but you know I thought, okay, so you know they're kind of pricey, you know, and I thought, dang, in order for me to get, you know, I like to say for corn, and this is where I'll probably want to talk to this at one point about when you grow stuff like corn, in particular, or other, and it's different for every different crop, but it's the principle is the same. You want to grow enough individual plants to maturity to provide a genetic exchange among themselves to keep the entire library of what you started with going, you know, so you don't have that inbreeding happen, okay? And, you know, we all know about Deliverance. Remember the movie Deliverance and the guy that was a banjo player?
Yeah.
I don't know, some of you are, I don't know, some of us are old enough to remember that one. You know, the guys went out into the back country, and there was this character, and he was kind of funny looking. It was like many generations they were marrying in their own family, and it may have caused some issues. You know, that's what happens when we don't breed out of our, you know, and the native people understood that. They were always marrying outside their stuff to keep the vitality going. They understood that perfectly. But, you know, you got these isolated populations, and they kind of marry in amongst themselves too many generations. But the guy was an incredible musician, which says that even in the face of, like, stuff getting really narrowed down, just like the Doritos, okay?
Right.
There's something still in there that we shouldn't throw away, that is still magic. And if you bring that back out and then mix it back with the diversity again, you still have it. You have a gift in there. So, yeah, the guy was an incredible musician, so he was like, always honor what remains, even though that's happened. You know, so like our current day stuff has been like really beat up pretty bad, you know, but you can, you know, there's stuff in there, but kind of like where I was going was, what I did is I went ahead and said, okay, in order to buy 300 seeds of each of these two varieties, this can cost me like $30. And I thought, man, at first I thought, no, I'll just order my other stuff and let it go. So I ordered my other stuff and let it go. Then I got thinking about it later on, and I thought, you know what? I got to pay the ransom. If I pay the ransom and take these two kinds of seed, 300 seeds of each, and grow them and start giving them out, maybe I can help set it free again, at least that batch. I mean, I know other people.
Oh, that is awesome. That just made me so happy.
We can go into there. We can go into that world and set stuff free. It's like the Underground Railroad, you know. And I want to say that, you know, there may be people here that are part of seed companies or have done the business of seeds. And I want to say to you, okay, here's my challenge to those of you who are out there selling, and I'm talking about like I'm not talking about the agricultural people who are doing it in a whole professional realm that has its place, but I mean the small time, like, or the vegetable and that, you know, the little packets with the little dollar signs on them. Those guys, okay, I'm talking to you guys. I'm saying your mission, okay, is to achieve such a level of excellence in what you provide and the education that you provide to your customers to such a level that it empowers them to be seed stewards to the point where they no longer need you, and that you put yourself out of business and repurpose yourself to something else. And I said, put that in your mission statement and put it in writing. And that's my challenge. And I see kind of like, we've all heard of singles groups. Okay, a singles group, you know, people that get together every Tuesday night over at the Rotary Club and try to figure out how they're going to find a mate, you know, and it's a singles group, you know, and so they come together and have their meetings, you know. But you could go to one of those meetings, and then you could go away and then come back 5 years later, and you're going to see the same people in there. And you're going to say, well, wait a minute, isn't the purpose of your single group to get everybody married off and put yourself out of existence? Do you realize that? And I say that about these seed companies. I say, okay, if you're going to do that, if you're going to follow that path, okay, and obviously it is a way that a lot of seed has gotten into people's hands and gotten their awareness of. Okay, that's the way to do it. Okay, so if you're going to follow that path, put it in your mission statement, at least theoretically. Put yourself out of business because you've done that good of a job. So I'm going to leave it at that.
Well, I thank you for that, because that has been my intention without that exact wording. That was excellent. Yeah. When I established a seed library in town, I want everybody to have developed their own seed library within their own home and their own garden, that then they go to their neighbor or their relative or whoever, and they keep sharing this out, and it keeps growing. That keeps it vital. When those seeds get out and they get in the ground, there's no vitality once they don't get in the soil. And,
Oh,
and giving them away. Yes, yes.
Yeah, you're
And
doing that. You're doing that
continuing
library and
education.
having pretty good luck with it. Yeah.
Yeah, I do regular education, and I've loaded that library 4 times this season.
Yeah.
And I've had tremendous amount of seeds returned, and native seeds, seed grasses. And
people coming in, bringing it from the water.
I mean, all of a sudden it's taken in, but I had to hold on to that energy for several years, a couple of years to kind of let it grow. And I understand nature is instantaneous.
Yeah,
When we grow, we have to wait. Yes, we have to have patience and let time and let the earth do what the earth does, and nature do what nature does, and it starts taking on its own. Those seeds, I believe, the seeds call. Who wants them? Just like on the area where people live, it will call them. They will step on a piece of property and feel it. This is my home. Yeah. That's what happened when I stepped onto this property, my daughter and I. And they will see it, and they will say, oh, it just called me. There's something about it. I had to go there. So it really is more than dollars and cents. There is an intrinsic connection with nature and seeds and soil, and it just keeps vibrating out. It's like the whole drop of water, and it hits and the movement keeps moving. And we don't always know. I don't know what happens to that seed, but I've asked that seed to go where it needs to go. When I'm feeling those little packets and setting that, I am praying. I am setting intention over that seed because it needs to go to whoever it needs to go to. It's awesome. Yeah, it's a divine gift. Yeah, it makes me happy when I go in there and load that thing up. It's very awesome.
Yeah, it's a blast, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes. Talk about a good payday. That's my payday.
Yeah, it's just, it really does. You really feel that purpose, really feel it. And then when people actually connect, when you see somebody really, and even if it's just one out of several, if you just see somebody really light up and take it and run with it, it's just like, wow, I did my job. Thank God. That's great.
Yeah, it's so cool.
And it's going to go on,
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to mention about the seed libraries and the seed saving that probably needs to be, and I know that a lot of people are probably addressing this, but I don't hear it as much as I feel like it needs to be said, is for those of you who are doing seed exchanges or take part in that, or do seed libraries and take part in that, what you want to be aware of first, when you get your seeds, and you're going to plant them, and you intend to save the seeds of what you plant, okay? You want to consider to the amount that you're going to plant. And let's go back to corn or maize. With that plant, the way it's put together, because it's a cross-pollinating species, in order to keep the whole of the genealogy pretty well intact of whatever you started with, you want to plant, some people, I like to say 300 plants. And you go, oh my God, that's huge. Like, I can't do that. But some of you can. And others can do like, some of you could do, you could split it up. And I'm just going to say that, but then the other things you don't need as many. But so if you want to do corn, a patch 20 by 30 feet would hold about 300 plants. Okay. That's what it needs. But you could have 3 or 4 friends get together and split up the task and do it in a smaller way, and then you blend it back together. But so when you give out your seeds, then you give seed that came from a whole lot of mommies and daddies in that little corn patch, rather than just one. Now 1 ear of corn is going to be connected to a lot of pollen that created that, but it still narrows it down when you start. Like when you hand people some seeds, you want to hand them seed that is from that whole field. Okay.
Right. That's right.
You can. Now, if you go into something like growing beans, they're primarily self-pollinating, and in order to keep the diversity within a variety of beans that you've acquired, you only need 20 or 30, which is a little bitty, like little, just a little piece of your fence or a little patch. You can do that, and you can harvest those. That's fine. Tomatoes, they say only 5 or 6 plants. Harvest the tomato seeds off of those. you keep it going. But and the organization that's out there called the Organic Seed Alliance, and you can go online, Organic Seed Alliance, and you can find them. They have like a handbook that they have that you can download, and it has a chart that they have one, there's others, but basically it goes through a lot of different crops and tells you about how many of a population of plants that you ought to plant to keep the vitality from generation to generation, And if you feel like you've got something that's kind of gotten a little weak, well, you find another source of that same one, and then kind of blend it back in and grow them together, and you can bring it back that way. Things like squash, I think it's good to have 25 or so plants, or maybe 30 or 40. But that sounds like a lot, but you can grow little clusters of things. You can grow like a lot of some things that large numbers of stuff, and just have them real close together. They may yield less, but you'll have a lot of different pollinators contributing to the seeds that you get. So you can overcome that by just little ways around it, and a lot of it is just cooperate with different friends that are doing the same thing, and then bring your stuff together at the end of the year. But I try to if I find something that I really like, and I think, well, this is something I really want to keep growing, and I really don't know, I may have been given it by somebody, and I don't know if they grew too few plants somewhere back in their time. I thought, well, I don't know what the history is. That's why it's good to get the history if you can.
Right.
Then I try to find somebody else that has the same thing, and I'll usually run into it, and I'll go, oh, hey, why don't we do a little switch, and, you can have some of mine, I can have some of yours, and it'll revitalize it, because you bring in that new blood and kind of kick it back in. And the other thing is, don't be afraid to let things cross a little bit in these different varieties. There's a time to let them all dance together, and then select out of that again. So there's cycles of time where we kind of refine it down to some character, and there's a cycle of time where you can bring them all together in the same field and let them dance, and see where it goes.
I call it community food. I'm putting a name on it. I'm calling it community food. Sure. That I need beans, but I don't have a big enough place, and maybe your place is big enough to grow a nice big garden. Right. And doing more community food and seeing us as a community growing and helping each other. A long time ago, we used to have the big barns where everybody would gather up and they'd share seeds and have their potlucks and talk, and at the end of the season. And it's kind of renewing that whole thing again. You had another name for it. I call it community food, but it's really about getting people connected again. And not, I'm just only going to grow my little plot. No, I'm growing. Please come in. I'll share, and you share with me, and it's all good. And we learn how to reconnect again with food and good food, delicious food.
So I have kind of a story about one of the first. How I got into biodynamics, and I had decided to go to the school in Sacramento. I had finally gotten an intern on a farm, and it ended up being kind of what I consider urban farm. Urban farm has animals and food, and sometimes there's the selling of the food, CSA boxes and stuff like that. A lot of the food is kept on the land for the people that live there and work there to eat. So I ended up going to this farm in Mendocino, and we started out, we had the guy's backyard next door, which was 5 acres, and we had moved on to there to start planting our produce, and then on the other 5 acres behind their house, we had all of our animals. We had turkeys, and and then we had the older fields where we'd let all the animals out and they could free range graze all over and have a nice day. One of the things that we needed was more space to grow more things, and we put it out in the community that we needed more land, and we got there was these people that had a really old house, had been in the family for a long time, like right on the coast, right on the beach. And then there was trees. And then they had this plot of land that was the most incredible soil I think I've ever smelt, but it was really, really moist. We ended up getting 5 acres there, and we planted all of our really wet stuff, like fennel root, onions, celeries, things that really needed those kinds of climate. And then eventually we got another 5-acre parcel, and the people even put up a greenhouse. So we were growing there. And then this old historical hotel right down the road where people would come and stay for a bed and breakfast, they didn't really like their yard. So we put in like a whole another thing of growing. And we could, even if we didn't have it where we were at, all the soil was so incredibly different at every location, and it was within 5 miles of each other. So
yeah, it doesn't have to be all in one spot, does it?
No.
I mean, it's kind of, it was, you could get to it, but it's spread out like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and we would caretake it mostly and plant it, but we allowed, the people who lived on the land to harvest. We showed them how to harvest the plants in respect, because like a fennel root, you can grow 5 of them from the basic root if you cut them properly. So, just a little bit of education, and people changed the hotel changed their whole menu to adopt the food that was growing at their hotel, right? So, you don't have to have like a plan of how it's going to work. And if you start moving out in your community, people, there are people that once they grasp what you're doing will really want to support it. And having a beautiful edible landscape that can be harvested for the benefit of all is better than having a terrible landscape that's not being taken care of.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. And even growing on small parts, little edges and places within a small town or a city. It's profound. It moves people. It really does. It's a movement, and people are connected to it. Yeah.
Well, just walking around, just on foot walking around the town, you could start identifying that little niche right there would be perfect.
Right.
Little patches that are like between a couple of buildings or on some little oddball little triangular spot that nobody ever could use for anything, that's like just sort of in between this and that. Like, oh my God, look at that. Maybe a parking lot that's not being used anymore, that's just gravel. It could be stripped off and soil brought in and regenerate the soil that's there, and kind of like reverse urbanization kind of a thing. You can do.
Well, how wonderful, instead of having, homeless and endangered people who are having problems, but to be able to put your shovel in the ground. That's one of the things that Bridgette and I do about moving rocks, gathering rocks, and digging holes. It really is about putting that activity back in their hands and having a small pot. And you will see them light up again to grow.
Oh, that's a healing thing big time. Oh, that's incredible. Yeah. Yeah, they're doing a lot of that with the veterans. A lot of veterans groups are doing that.
Yes, that's right.
Getting, but it's the whole, all these people that have that, maybe an estrangement from society because of what they've been through, that this can just take them right back.
That's right. And the power of the soil is so healing, and putting that seed in the ground and watching the processes. It is life changing, and because it is so natural, and it doesn't come in a package, and you don't have to find a government avenue to go get help for it. It's often overlooked because it seems too simplistic for our minds anymore. Because it's the simple things and the things of earth that really bring us back to the center of who we are, and let our minds heal. And when the mind and the body all heal, it's because we've been separated. We've been separated from each other. We've been separated from the earth. And it's important that we reconnect there. And I think that all of us, many of us who garden and seed save, that is really our core of who we are. We're wanting to see our planet and our humanity healed in any way we can. Even the smallest way that we can. A small little library in a small little town. It doesn't matter. Yes. Yep. Yeah. It's all good.
Okay, so I wanted to get Greg's take on this. I'm going to throw him a little curveball. No.
Yeah.
And then I have another thing to talk about too, about the different kinds of seeds, so people kind of understand what they're getting involved with. Okay, so I know from firsthand example, when I had brain cancer, when I first got brain cancer, I had this small little garden in this yard. I kind of lived outside of town, and I would plant these. I planted these tomato plants. And what happened is that the tomatoes that grew were like not really the species that came in the package, and they decided to be something completely different. And then later on I went and a friend of mine sent me the Anastasia books, and I started to kind of understand and grasp that, the disease and illness in my body, my DNA, if I was connected or disconnected with myself, also started to play out in the food. And I believe that these tomato plants actually, even though they came out of a regular seed packet, were organic, and I planted them, that they adapted themselves to take care of me, that they knew that I had brain cancer before I had I knew I had brain cancer, and that they were growing these tomatoes, they were like regular, like good old boy tomatoes, and they were like dinner plate sized tomatoes that they were growing, and the red color was like so intense. They weren't like what they were in the thing. So do you have any stories or thoughts about that, about what's going on with us, how the plants work in tandem to benefit us and to heal us, and also if we're more connected to the plant and understand it, like the difference in the growth and the relationship kind of a thing?
Well, of course, you have this. A lot of times when you live in a certain area, there's a group of people that lives in a certain area, that their particular society or whatever and disposition, and certain plants will kind of frequent that place that happen to be maybe the medicinal quality that particular group of people has sort of a high incidence of some issue. That happens, that people will talk about that a lot of times people will show up in an area that has the medicinal plants that are pertinent to what they need to look at, and that can happen. I've heard people, it could be just a straight up coincidence, but take it where you want to. Nature's got all the elements that we need if we can identify it and tune into it. But like your thing with those tomatoes, there could have been some stray whatever in there, and that's what you got. But then your influence on it is present. What I saw when I gave some people a whole mix of a bunch of we were growing the rainbow corn, and they were growing some other kinds, and I gave them some, and I said, here, try all that out in your place. And they had like a little community they were living in, and they grew a nice big bunch of this, kind of a big mixture of this corn, and then they got it all out after it was harvested, and we had a big room that they had all of it all dry and spread out, and we spread it out on the floor. This enormous batch of corn. And we were crawling around there just looking at it. They had spent a bunch of time looking at it, and I was over there and we were looking at it, and it was like, we're like reading it almost. We're like reading it, and it was like I was looking over all this stuff, and it was stuff that I had grown, but they had grown it now. And so I'm looking at it, and I said, there's something about this. And we were just, and then the aha moment, I went, my God, you put your imprint on it. And it was as if their energy had affected somehow the signature of this whole group of this corn. And it was like reading through it. And I'm like, whoa, you guys put your imprint on this. Maybe this happens with everything, just like when you got, I always like to say, like when you know people that are couples, and they sort of they start talking like each other, and their dog starts looking like them, and all that kind of crazy stuff. And I had a friend in high school. I was over visiting him, and his mom had a parakeet that she taught some words, and that parakeet was doing its little babbling on, and And I went, my God, there's his mom's voice. I could recognize his mom's voice in that silly little bird. And it was like an imprint, and, but maybe your deal drew that out of the codes of that plant. And so you got that kind of tomato that wasn't supposed to be there show up. And, there you were, I mean, all these kind of mysterious things can happen, and we just sort of go with it and see what it means to each of us.
Good answer. Good answer. Okay.
I can BS pretty good, so take it for what it's worth.
Well, and everybody, the good thing is, like me, you, and Janie, operating together today, we have just a different language for the same thing, and so it's good for people to hear how those languages or understanding reflect, right? So it gives it more. It gives them people listening a better ability to absorb it. Okay, so before we close, I really want to make sure that do you have a word, Greg, for that? Well, I'm going to call them the ancient seeds, because we would have the ancient seeds or indigenous seeds. Then there would be the heirloom. Then there would be the hybrid. Then there would be the GMO, right? So what's the oldest seeds? What would you call them? The indigenous seeds, the ancient seeds? Well,
I like to just use the kind of the one I like to just use the word heritage seed, and just kind of use that for pretty much anything that has been passed on that is part of earlier culture and has kind of traveled along with us. So I use that term. I know it can be differentiated out, and people have different ways to interpret that, but that's kind of how I do it. I kind of keep it simple, and I use that term, heritage seeds.
Okay, great.
Some people use antique seeds or
whatever,
I've got
it's almost whatever works
in the ground right now. Yeah.
Okay, so I just want people to kind of understand that there's a different level, and so you guys will see where I'm taking this. Okay, so we've got the original seeds of the planet from all different places, all different heritages that we're going to call the heritage seeds, the oldest seeds and plants. Then we have heirloom that made its way in, which is a little bit of an off branch. People maybe grew them in a different way, pollinated them with different things. And so it was done more in a natural way that these seeds changed. But then we got to hybrid. And hybrid is when they actually cross or splice the plant with, say, something like a tomato plant. They'll splice it with a shrimp gene, which makes the tomato.
That's your GMO. That's not hybrid. That's straight GMO. That's your transgenic stuff. Yeah, hybrid's different.
But the GMO, no, there's one more step, because the GMO is when they actually splice the poison in it, and
you're splicing something else from entirely different.
So the hybrid is actually something they did before. Because you can get organic seeds, but they're hybrid, but they're still not good. They're not.
Yeah, what they do, and people can kind of pursue that on there. The hybrid thing is not necessarily a bad thing, because you're still using all the natural genes of those plants. You're not like incorporating anything from the outside. And what they've done is they've gotten a couple of different like lineages that are real different, that might have become very narrowed and specialized, and then they cross them intentionally to like create like this sort of a spike in the amount of genetic information that's in that offspring, and it like makes something that performs really like a higher level, much bigger level of performance for that time. And they'll do that and to create like a batch of seeds that will grow into a plant that's going to like produce like crazy, because it's got all this totally different genes from the male half and the female half, that now it has something of everything, and it performs in a huge way. And they've gotten to where there's intentional technique to do that, and then of course then you plant those, and what will happen is everything gets reshuffled. And you get all these other combinations, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but what you'll get is you'll just get a whole bunch of different stuff. And out of that, after so many generations, you can kind of like play around with it and stabilize some of those and make them okay again.
Okay,
but it's kind of a very focused thing to do the hybrids, and it's you're just sort of leveraging what nature already has.
Okay,
but it's not the same as GMO. Yeah.
Right. So we want people to understand that there's a lot of different kinds of seeds and where you want to be at with your seeds.
Yeah.
So so now we can say that GMO is a bigger encompassing. Say, for example, they take a tomato plant, they slice it with a shrimp gene so that the plant can grow in cold climate.
Right.
And also it lasts a long time in your refrigerator. However, if you have a shellfish issue and you eat that plant, you could get anaphylactic shock and you can die in the hospital, not understand why. So the GMOs are like now we're into a bigger cycle of the GMOs are not just the corns and the wheat and all these sweet beets and all these different things, but now we've just incorporated a larger GMO which also incorporates some of the dicing and splicing of other plants that people would use that they don't think are GMO.
Yeah. What you want to remember too, well, of course, the good news is there are a lot of people that are very aware about the seeds, kind of like what we're trying to do, that are out there. The movement with the seeds and the heritage seeds and heirloom and all these old kinds, the movement for that is so alive that I think we're going to make it through this, okay? And as long as we keep these communications going, we can keep all these non-corrupted seeds going, okay? And we should be okay. The problem is that our food supply is being 90% of the soybeans and corn commercially is some form of a GMO variety. It's been done. It's been altered with this type of technique that we're talking about, with things from other sources like that, other species, stuff that's outside the stream of evolution that normally would take place. And how much time we got left? How much time do we have?
Well, I have another question I want to throw at you, the last minute question. And it comes from...
well, then I'll just make that short,
it comes from the top of our, radio network. But who owns the seed? And I think what he's asking is like a question, maybe your opinion of who owns the seeds. Who owns the seed?
All that, the stuff with patenting and all that, it's just sort of this is something that's emerged, People, claim things for their own. It's just like intellectual property, copywriting, all that stuff, because seed genetics is like lines of code, just like information, like written material that gets copyrighted, et cetera, and people claim this stuff, and I could see how if you developed something that was so specialized that you wanted to put a patent on it, but a lot of times there's people trying to patent wild species. There are actually wild species of plants that companies have gone in and that for medicinal purposes, and they have actually obtained a patent on a totally wild species. That right there is so far off of ethics, in my opinion. I think that all of us, when you're dealing with that stuff, let your conscience or your convictions be your guide in how you deal with it. Because we can we can push back against that stuff. There might be consequences, but still, you got to be a warrior. You got to deal with this craziness that's coming along. And I think that a lot of the weird stuff that's going on with GMO, I think that nature will comb it out. Nature always adapts and has a corrective way of dealing with everything that gets thrown at it. And so we will come and go. And all this contamination that we created with some of those experiments will get combed out of the life of the earth. I think the earth has got that intelligence, the rays of light coming from the stars and all that is all coming together in a favorable place like a planet like this, and they all work together to kind of get the harmonies back. And that'll correct itself, but we still have to be activists, in the short term, to deal with this stuff.
So we could say though, I was just thinking about something, so I'm gonna think out loud because we got like 1 minute before we're out of here.
Oh, okay.
And I just want to thank you guys for showing up. We'll hear the commercial and then we're out of here. But if we grow the seed, we own it. If we grow that particular seed, because we just talked about that our genetics matter, our imprint matters on the seeds that we get. So it becomes, once we grow it, it becomes ours. And we can do whatever we want with it.
Well, if you grow something that's been patented, they might have something to say about it. But as long as you're not out there selling it, you know, then you don't have to worry about that. And there's a whole lot to that. It'd be a whole other talk that we'd all have to study up on.
Well, maybe instead of owning it, but your ability to do with it what you feel is right within your.
I would always say, let your convictions be your guide.
Yeah.
And if you know what's true within yourself, go with that and never waver from it.
Right.
And just hold to your truth, man. And just, you know, but I appreciate your inviting me and Jannie on to the show, and to all you guys that are running the radio show. And you know, thank you very much for letting us.
We hope we can get you to come back on again sometime in the future, for sure.
Okay. Well, great. And we'll just carry on from here. Spring is coming, and we're planting seeds right now, aren't we?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, Greg, I got my beauty waves are in the ground and they're up. The beauty wave beans
are up. Good for you. Oh, good for you. Excellent.
Okay.
All righty. Signing off. Okay.
All right. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Okay.
Bye.
Happy growing.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Take a look around, kid. What do you see? Homes being foreclosed, people working 2-3 jobs just to put food on the table and still drowning in debt. Don't get me wrong. This country was founded on great ideals and principles. They've all been ruined by the banks. Open your eyes to the banks that are robbing you. You know who my favorite president was? Who? Thomas Jefferson. Because he saw all of this coming and tried to stop it. He fought the banks. JFK too, and they killed him for it. The banking institution is more dangerous than an army, he said. He also said that every generation needs a revolution, Jimmy. The American dream is just that. Just a dream. War is a continuation of politics, only by other means. Politics is a continuation of economics by other means. This is our bank. This is our war. And this is our plan of attack.
Banks have become an essential threat to our democracy. So consider this justice.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the internet. Please help support this station so this battle can continue forward. Revolution Radio!
This is the people's war. It is our war. We are the fighters. Fight it then. Fight it with all that is in us. And may God defend the right.
Warning, warning.
We gotta stop up!
kill us all! See how the trouble you've started? Be they the government, be they industry, be they organized labor, be they anyone, or human beings. Time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported talk radio station, throwing ourselves